It's been hailed as one of the most harrowing portraits of war ever captured on screen. A film that doesn't just depict combat, but what it does to the human soul. A story that turned Robert De Niro into a wounded American icon, and Christopher Walken into a symbol of fractured innocence. But what if I told you that The Deer Hunter was never meant to be the film we know today? That its most haunting moments weren't in the script? That behind every anguished stare and every roll of Russian roulette was a production spiraling out of control, fueled by grief, ego, and something more powerful than any bullet: truth. Today, we're peeling back the layers of The Deer Hunter, from unspoken trauma to scenes that almost destroyed the cast. These are the secrets the filmmakers never planned to reveal, but that now, 5 decades later, change everything you thought you knew. When Universal Pictures greenlit The Deer Hunter in 1977, they didn't expect controversy. They expected an Oscar-bait war movie. What they got was something they couldn't contain. The original screenplay, then titled The Man Who Came to Play, wasn't even about Vietnam. It was a Vegas set story about men obsessed with Russian roulette, a strange metaphorical short story written by 2 obscure screenwriters, Louis Garfinkel and Quinn Redeker. It was director Michael Cimino who took that story and cracked it wide open. He saw something more, something mythic. To Cimino, it wasn't about gambling in a casino. It was about gambling with your life in the jungle. And more importantly, what happens when you come home with ghosts? Cimino scrapped most of the original script and reshaped it into a triptych: a wedding, a war, and a return. 3 acts, 1 transformation. From working-class steelworkers in Pennsylvania to hollowed-out men holding a gun to their own head. At first, the studio balked. 3 hours long, 1 wedding scene lasting over 45 minutes, no major action scenes. Cimino stood firm, and then he got Robert De Niro. Fresh off Taxi Driver, De Niro had become the face of American disillusionment. With him attached, Universal reluctantly agreed, but no one, not even De Niro, could have imagined how far this film would go. Because Cimino wasn't just trying to make a movie, he was trying to make a statement about war, about memory, and about what it costs a man to survive when no part of him comes back whole. To understand the heart of The Deer Hunter, you have to understand De Niro's preparation. Because Mike, the character, wasn't just acting, he was lived. De Niro didn't rehearse the way other actors did. He immersed. Before filming began, he visited steel mills in Cleveland, working 12-hour shifts under a fake name just to understand the rhythm of the job. He shadowed Vietnam veterans. Not just generals or heroes, but the men who came back broken. Men who couldn't sleep with the lights off. Men who flinched at firecrackers on the 4th of July. De Niro asked them what it felt like to be left behind. Not physically, but spiritually. And they told him, and he carried those stories into every line, every breath, every silent stare. During the infamous Russian roulette scenes, De Niro demanded real tension. He didn't want blanks. He didn't want prop guns. He wanted the click of the chamber to be real, live, spinning, unpredictable. He told director Cimino, "If I know it's safe, the audience will too. I want to not know." That tension, you can see it in his eyes. Not just performance, real fear, real madness. According to crew members, De Niro stayed in character throughout filming in Thailand. He slept alone, spoke to no one. He even began journaling as Mike, writing entries about Nick and home, as if he were still trapped in that bamboo cage. When co-star John Savage broke down after a grueling scene in the POW camp, it was De Niro, still in character, who walked over and whispered, "Don't think about your lines, think about what's left of you." That line, it wasn't in the script, it stayed in the scene. Because sometimes when the truth shows up unannounced, you don't yell, "Cut," if The Deer Hunter looks like hell on screen. That's because behind the scenes it nearly was. Michael Cimino didn't want actors playing war. He wanted them experiencing it. Filming in Thailand meant unbearable humidity, contaminated water, and at times, no electricity. The crew suffered heat stroke, extras collapsed, equipment melted, and Cimino, he pushed harder. Christopher Walken, who would later win an Oscar for his performance, lost over 30 pounds during the shoot. Not for aesthetic reasons, but because the environment broke him down day by day. In one scene, he's slapped by a North Vietnamese guard. Walken told Cimino, "If you want a real reaction, don't tell me when the slap is coming." And they didn't. What you see in the final film, that's not acting. That's a man flinching from real pain. John Savage, who played Steven, nearly drowned while filming the river escape sequence. He was strapped into the bamboo cage. When the wire snapped prematurely, he plunged into the rapids and wasn't breathing when pulled out. The cameras kept rolling. They used the footage. Even the wedding scenes, shot in the relative safety of Ohio, were grueling. Cimino insisted on using real immigrants from a Russian Orthodox community. No English, no professional extras. He let the cameras roll for hours at a time while the actors remained in character, drinking real vodka, singing real hymns. Meryl Streep, cast as Linda, later said, "It didn't feel like acting. It felt like watching a family disintegrate in slow motion." And maybe that's why the film works. Because when you watch The Deer Hunter, you're not watching actors go through motions. You're watching them survive something, together, barely. There's a moment in The Deer Hunter that refuses to leave the theater behind. It follows you into the night. It's Nick's face as he sits at a grimy casino table in Saigon. The lights above flicker. Cigarette smoke coils in the stale air. Around him, men shout and spin roulette wheels. But all you see is Nick, a vacant prince in exile. The boy who smiled at his best friend's wedding is gone. That scene isn't a performance. It's a haunting. Christopher Walken didn't just play Nick. He became him. Walken arrived on set, bright-eyed and strong. That was before isolation, before the weight of watching his friend's character break, before Michael Cimino began, stripping everything. Light, sound, comfort from the man. Cimino was unyielding in his vision. He didn't want actors reciting lines. He wanted them feeling every beat, every breath. Emotion wasn't enough. He demanded something closer to collapse. He kept the cast separated. No shared meals, no casual conversations. He wanted Stockholm Syndrome with the set. He wanted them dependent on their own inner voices, unable to lean on each other. It was Nicholas's creation, but Nick's disintegration mirrored Walken's. In private, Walken spoke rarely, but crew members remember a quiet shift. At first, he was polite, curious. Then came the nights he'd vanish. No one had seen him leave the villa or return. There was a silence around him, a withdrawal that felt like mourning. He wouldn't look at De Niro. He avoided Meryl. He stopped telling jokes, not because he was method, but because he was unraveling. Walken later described shooting a particular roulette scene. He sent his eyes forward, never blinking, as the wheel spun. He said it felt like something was looking at him, like death was sliding into the frame. People talk about how method acting can excavate trauma. What happened to Walken was something else. Abrupt, unformed. He once told a journalist, "There were times on set I couldn't tell if I was there or somewhere else." That creeping detachment is what makes Nick so unforgettable. There was no rivalry between Walken and De Niro. Instead, there was a tension of pain. Each actor suffered a different fracture. With De Niro, it was quiet rage. With Walken, it was a slow surrender. They never shared dialogue in those Vietnam scenes. They didn't look at each other. They existed separately in the same wound. De Niro needed silence to carry him. Walken needed detachment to survive. Yet, the silence speaks volumes. There was no rivalry between Walken and De Niro. Instead, there was a tension of pain. Each actor suffered a different fracture. With De Niro, it was quiet rage. With Walken, it was a slow surrender. They never shared dialogue in those Vietnam scenes. They didn't look at each other. They existed separately in the same wound. De Niro needed silence to carry him. Walken needed detachment to survive. Yet, the silence speaks volumes. There's a scene where Nick is slapped by a guard. It's brief, and for most viewers, invisible. But what you feel in Nick's recoil is not a rehearsal. It's pain. Walken later said he didn't know when or how the slap would come. He just stiffened, and when the hand hit him, it cut through something inside. A flash of, "That's it," a moving line between two people. The camera didn't cut. It lingered on Walken's face, twitching with shock. No bravado, no recovery, just a man closing. Decades later, he told a fan, "There was something in that room, not a cheat or a trick. It was cruelty." Some actors would call out, "Cut." Walken didn't. He gave them what they wanted, reality. The remote Thai villa where they filmed the POW scenes was designed to incapacitate. Not physically, but mentally. Limited electricity. No fans. Roaches and rats scurried in the flour sacks. Sunlight poured through windows. By day, it was an oven. By night, a trap. Walken found himself watching rats gnaw on food scraps. He ate cold rice. He had nightmares of fire, of men pulling strings, of tables rattling while he tried to sleep. He called it the thick, as if the air itself was a mass pressing on his brain. Most crew tried to shield the actors from the worst, but Cimino didn't listen. If grit was required, he would supply. Always. Walken began sleeping in shifts, inside one of the two-story treehouses on set, alone. He woke with panic, trembled. He began writing in a notebook, not about Nick, about himself, about floating, about nothingness. That's the secret Nick carries on screen. Not just trauma, detachment, lack of weight, the emotional nitrogen that stops you from breathing too deeply. De Niro insisted on using prop guns, but during one tournament scene, a real Smith & Wesson was brought in, part of Cimino's relentless pursuit of authenticity. Walken held the revolver in his lap as the camera rolled. He spun the cylinder. He felt the cold steel. The weight was real, the chamber empty, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He nearly wept. He passed the revolver to one of the grips. The man handed it right back. They didn't need illusions. Walken had already seen the danger behind the camera, so he didn't look. After months of isolation, there was a makeshift meal shared between extras and crew. A break in the spell. Walken came out and stood in the center. He asked them to eat. He said nothing else. It wasn't an apology, not a speech. It was an exorcism. Most of the crew collapsed. Some cried. Nick couldn't say, "I'm sorry." Christopher Walken didn't need to. During editing, the filmmakers nearly cut a moment where Nick tries to speak. Just a word, just one detail. He sees a mouthful of rice slap across the table during a prison meal. He opens his mouth as if to talk. A clean egg slides under his fingernails. Then he's silent. Cimino fought to keep it. He said that moment, Nick's desire to speak but inability, was the point. It stayed. After Walken's win for Best Supporting Actor, he said, "I feel like I died already. On camera. Not because he played a martyr, because Nick was. The lights, the silence. They stripped something that he carried with him." When Walken returned to New York, it was year's end. Cold. Gray. People laughed. Traffic surged. He couldn't speak. He couldn't explain. He walked past firecrackers in the street, hit the ground like a flinch. He slept in the dark. He told no one. He started taking small roles with no guns, no uniform, no danger. Nick didn't stop being Nick. Christopher Walken didn't. He went on to play gangsters, fathers, martyrs. He was often stoic, detached, quiet, because he'd already given everything. When The Deer Hunter premiered in 1978, critics called it important, unflinching, and brutally poetic, but not everyone agreed. And in some corners of the world, it was condemned as propaganda. The controversy centered around one thing. Russian roulette Cimino and co-writer Derek Washburn had insisted that stories of POWs being forced to play the game were real, based on interviews, memoirs, whispers from the front lines, but no hard evidence ever surfaced. Vietnamese American groups and anti-war activists protested the film's release. They argued that it demonized the Vietnamese people, portraying them as sadistic caricatures instead of real human beings caught in a geopolitical nightmare. One protester outside a New York theater held up a sign that read, "Hollywood turns trauma into fiction and fiction into hate." Others called it artistic license, a metaphor for how soldiers gamble with their lives long after the war ends. But the controversy didn't stop the momentum. In 1979, The Deer Hunter won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best I.E. Director. It solidified Cimino as a visionary and divided audiences even more. Some veterans claimed the film captured their pain with eerie precision. Others said it glorified trauma, making spectacle out of suffering. And still, the final scene, after everything, offered a strange, broken moment of unity. The surviving friends gathered in a diner, raise a glass and sing, "God Bless America," not triumphantly, not patriotically, but as if clinging to something that no longer feels real. For some viewers, that ending was a cry for hope. For others, a cruel irony. Either way, no one forgot it. Michael Cimino wasn't a household name before The Deer Hunter, but after the Oscars, he was hailed as a genius, a Kubrick in the making, a man who had wrangled chaos into something transcendent. But genius has a cost, and Cimino's next move would reveal just how deep his obsession ran. What most people don't know is that The Deer Hunter's chaotic production nearly broke him. The budget ballooned from $7 million to $15 million. The schedule overran by weeks. Universal executives were furious, and yet, Cimino didn't flinch, because in his mind, realism wasn't enough. He wanted immersion. There's a scene where De Niro returns home and finds himself alienated by familiar surroundings. The house hasn't changed, but he has. Cimino insisted on reshooting that entire sequence because he didn't feel the emotional dissonance in the original take. That reshoot cost $500,000 for a few minutes of screen time, but it worked, because when Mike sits on that couch staring at the wallpaper and trying to remember who he used to be, we feel it, the ghost in his own home. After The Deer Hunter, Cimino was given carte blanche to make whatever he wanted. He made Heaven's Gate, a film so ambitious, so over budget, and so disastrous, it almost bankrupted United Artists. It ended his career. Some say he was a victim of Hollywood's system. Others say he drowned in his own ego. But whatever you believe, one thing's certain. The Deer Hunter was his moment of clarity, a flash of lightning before the storm. And like the men it portrayed, Cimino never really came back from what he experienced making it. Robert De Niro is famous for disappearing into characters, but The Deer Hunter changed something in him, not just as an actor, but as a man. Before filming began, De Niro traveled to steel towns in Pennsylvania. He met veterans, sat with them, listened, and what he heard haunted him. He spoke with one man who said, "You don't come back, just your body does." Another simply said, "I stopped dreaming. I don't want to remember." Those words stuck with De Niro, and they shaped the soul of Michael Vronsky, his character, a man who survives the war, but comes home to find that he didn't survive. There's a scene, one that audiences rarely mention, but actors talk about with reverence. It's the moment Mike sees Linda, played by Meryl Streep, after returning home. They don't kiss, they barely speak, they just exist in the same room. What wasn't in the script was the long, silent pause. De Niro held it, unprompted. The crew let the cameras roll. You can see his eyes well up. He's not just playing a character trying to hold back tears. He's living the grief of every vet he met, and in that moment, De Niro was no longer acting. One of the sound guys said afterward, "There was a stillness in that room I'll never forget, like time froze." It's why the film works. Not because it shouts, but because it aches. And De Niro never quite got over it. Years later, when asked what role changed him the most, He didn't hesitate. "Mike," he said, "because he's still in there somewhere." The Deer Hunter was a breakthrough for many of its stars, but success came with scars. John Savage, who played Stephen, did some of the film's most physically demanding scenes, including hanging from a helicopter over a river. No stuntman, no double. Just Savage in a harness dangling over danger. He later said that scene gave him recurring nightmares for years. After The Deer Hunter, Savage struggled with roles. He found work, but nothing ever matched the emotional peak of that film. "It's like I touched lightning once," he said, "and I kept chasing it." Meryl Streep, who was grieving the death of her partner John Cazale during filming, found The Deer Hunter both cathartic and cruel. She later said she had to separate Linda from herself, because in her real life, she was saying goodbye to someone she loved, while on screen she was falling in love with a man who'd come home broken. And then there was Walken. He won an Oscar for his performance, but in interviews, he often dodged questions about the film, as if talking about it reopened something. "It was real," he once said, "too real." The cast didn't do reunions. There were no big anniversary panels, not because they disliked the film, but because it hurt too much to revisit. Christopher Walken was once asked why he never spoke at length about his Oscar win. His response: "What do you say when you win something for dying on camera?" The final moments of The Deer Hunter are among the most debated in cinema history. Michael returns from Vietnam. Nick is gone. The town is quieter. The light is different. Nothing feels like it used to. Then comes the breakfast scene. The survivors gather in a small diner. They sit in silence. They pour coffee. No one talks about the war. No one can. And then, someone, quietly, almost instinctively, starts singing, "God Bless America." It's not triumphant. It's not patriotic. It's grief. It's the sound of people trying to make sense of loss, of death, of a country that sent them away and forgot to explain why. Some critics called the ending manipulative, others called it profound. But the truth is, it wasn't meant to be political. Cimino later explained, "That scene isn't about America. It's about belonging, even if what you belong to doesn't make sense anymore." The deer hunting, the mountains, the bar with friends, those were rituals, things that anchored these men to a world before chaos. After war, those rituals feel like echoes, familiar but empty. So when they sing, they're not singing to celebrate, they're singing to remember, to hold on to whatever they still have, even if it's just each other. And that's the real genius of The Deer Hunter. It's not a war movie. It's a story about what happens after the war, about the silence that follows gunfire, about the faces at a kitchen table that aren't there anymore. It doesn't give you closure. It just gives you truth. Raw, complicated, human. When The Deer Hunter hit theaters in late 1978, it wasn't just another movie release. It was a detonation. The film stunned audiences. Some walked out in silence. Others sat in their seats long after the credits rolled, unable to move. A few even shouted at the screen, angry, shaken, disturbed. And Hollywood didn't know what to do with it. This wasn't the polished, upbeat war story studios were used to packaging. This was messy, quiet, devastating. There were no clear heroes, no real victories, and yet, The Deer Hunter became a juggernaut. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actor for Christopher Walken. It was celebrated by critics, dissected by intellectuals, and whispered about in studio backrooms. But behind the trophies and standing ovations, there was discomfort. Some veterans protested the film, claiming it distorted their experiences. Others praised it, saying it was the first time someone had actually understood what the war did to them. Michael Cimino, the film's mysterious and obsessive director, became a star overnight. And then, just as quickly, he vanished. His follow-up film, Heaven's Gate, was a financial disaster. Studios blamed Cimino's artistic excesses. And suddenly, the man who gave Hollywood its most haunting war film was cast aside. It was almost poetic. The man who captured the cost of war became a casualty of the very system that once celebrated him. Hollywood moved on. Faster, louder, easier. Stories took over the box office. And The Deer Hunter became a relic. Too heavy, too real, too complicated for repeat viewings, but it never disappeared. Decades later, The Deer Hunter remains one of the most emotionally devastating films ever made. But why? Why does it still grip the soul like a vice? Because it doesn't give you answers. It gives you wounds. It doesn't care about justifying war. It cares about what happens when the flags come down and the silence begins. It reminds us that trauma doesn't wear a uniform, that grief doesn't make speeches, that sometimes the real battle begins after the bullets stop. In a world saturated with fast-cut action and streaming spectacle, The Deer Hunter is slow. It lingers. It dares you to sit in the quiet, to feel the ache of lives disrupted, to witness men who once shared laughter and beer now stare into a void they can't describe. And in doing so, it gives us a mirror. We see our own questions, our own confusion, our own longing for something that made sense before it all fell apart. Veterans still talk about it, not always kindly, but always honestly. Young filmmakers study it, not for plot points, but for truth. And audiences still come back to it, not to be entertained, but to be reminded that some stories demand more than just a watch. They demand reflection. The Deer Hunter isn't just a movie. It's a wound preserved on film, and if you let it, it'll stay with you. Not because it wants to, but because it has to. Because some stories are too true to forget, too sacred to simplify, too human to ever fully understand.